So next I want to talk about a subject that seems very much a soft skill when you're talking about architecture, but it actually turns out to be a really important thing, which is managing individual productivity. And this is particularly tricky for people who are making the transition from the role of developer to the role of architect, because as a developer, mostly you know what to do when you come into work because somebody's telling you what to do. There's a list for you, there's requirements, there's some sort of JIRA listing, there's always a to-do list for you. But very often when you become an architect, you become the one who creates to-do lists, and you also gather a lot of extraneous, external responsibilities like meetings and liaisoning with business and other things, and all those guys have meetings and schedules. So you need to get better and better at managing your own productivity because now someone else is not going to manage it for you. So let's talk about several aspects of this, particularly in this transition from a role of developer to an architect who is responsible for multiple people's kind of schedule now. I want to talk about some aspects of managing email, managing time and prioritization, and some tools that can help you do this stuff. This is very much in the wheelhouse of one of my books a couple of books ago called The Productive Programmer, which is a book about individual productivity as a programmer, not so much this kind of PIM, personal information manager like productivity, but more kind of hardcore developer productivity. But now I want to talk about specific kind of office productivity stuff. The first thing I want to talk about is everyone's favorite thing to hate, which is email. Email is a pretty awful kind of communication mechanism because it's very cumbersome to get stuff done in it. You have to switch to another application and click on buttons and type things and subject lines and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of cognitive overhead with email. But the problem with email, as Mark alluded to in one of the previous sections, is that this is the primary communication mechanism in a lot of organizations, and people inadvertently overload this to do a bunch of other stuff on top of it, like making it their to-do list. So email sucks in organizations because emails tend to bloat with lots of different topics and details. And this is a problem because now you get 5 different topics in an email and it's to 20 people and you reply to all, and then some of those people reply to pieces of it, and before long you have this email explosion of junk. It's hard to answer each one because you have to respond to every one of these points. Reply to all is just evil, but that is the reflex for most people in organizations because they're trying to spread these things as far and wide as possible. As I mentioned, it's frequently overloaded as the only communication channel within the organization, and so you are both required to have it on all the time and to be subject to its constant interruptions. And this is one of the points that I made in Productive Programmer. There is absolutely no better way to destroy your productivity than to respond to email as it comes in. That little preview thing that pops up as the bottom of your screen is pure evil. You need to turn that off because this is taking advantage of some sort of innate human characteristics that when small movements happen out of the corner of your eye, it distracts you and it catches your attention, because there was a point in time that small movements out of the corner of your eye meant there's a saber-toothed tiger about to attack you, so you need to be able to run really fast. And so we're still wired that way. So you see those little pop-ups come up, you can't help but be distracted by them, which is just going to pull you out of that flow state that you really need to be in for doing software development. So one of my biggest pieces of advice is turn email off while you're coding. Get people out of this idea that they can reach you instantly via email. There are also telephones now that you can use that nobody ever uses for anything now, but that's a great way if you need an instant answer for something. And you can get in a flow state for doing email just like you get in flow with code. So you code for a couple of hours and then you go into your email client, you open it up, you hammer through that in flow state and close it down and then go back to coding. Having that more set day where you have long periods of flow time is much, much better from a developer productivity standpoint. So you can make email suck a lot less. When you answer an email, always summarize and then delve into details. This is the TLDR idea. This is a leet speak thing for too long, didn't read. Very often, as soon as you get an email that has 5 or 6 paragraphs, at best you'll skim it, but not get the real gist of it. Be kind to the people that you're going to write a 5-paragraph email to, and put a summary sentence or two at the top with a TLDR tag so that they know if they need to spend more time delving into that and understanding what's there. reply to only one thing at a time. If you get an email from someone that has 5 things in it, send them 5 replies. One reply for each thing they want to know, so that cuts down the potential for this explosive email chain, because they may answer 2 of those, but then the other 3 are resolved, and now this email thread will die of a natural death rather than be artificially prolonged forever, and now you're sorting through 20 or 30 email messages trying to find something. Get those things squeezed down to as small as possible as quickly as you can. Untrain that reply to all reflex, reply to individuals as much as possible, and reply to all when you have to. And ultimately, you need to find a better communication channel to spread things around, whether that's instant messaging. Some companies use instant messaging as the instant, got to know this right away kind of thing, which is much better than email. It's even more instantaneous than email, and potentially less disruptive even, because you don't have to switch to a different elaborate client and all that sort of stuff, and subject lines and all that. Instant messaging is very much just very short phrases. And so a lot of companies leverage that more effectively than email. And probably the worst thing you can do is use your email as a to-do list. Mark in an earlier section showed an email inbox that had over 2,000 messages in it. That is absolutely beyond useless, because message number 1990, you will never ever read that message. So just having a giant pile of things in your inbox is just a guarantee that you're going to miss really important stuff, and you're never going to get to all that stuff. So it's a terrible to-do list, and it's a terrible way to prioritize things. And in fact, I'm a huge proponent of this very difficult thing, but a very valuable thing called Inbox Zero. My goal in life is to keep both of my email accounts at Inbox Zero at all times, and do this in batches and try to resolve these things as quickly as possible. Get them out of your email and into a to-do list or into a calendar or something where it's actionable, and stop using email as the single source of information that exists in your world. Inbox Zero is very hard, and many of you who are listening to this just roll your eyes when you would think about the prospect of Inbox Zero. But the interesting thing that Inbox Zero does for you is, if you can achieve that, and initially you'll have to achieve that by declaring email bankruptcy and starting over. That's a pretty common thing out in the world. But what Inbox Zero shows you is exactly how much of your day is legitimately taken up by dealing with email. If you just let your inbox folder continuously pile up, you have no idea what kind of time it really takes to deal with that every day. If you manage an Inbox Zero, you know exactly how much time it takes to manage that, and you tend not to let things fall through the crack as much. This is one of those really dangerous things as you move from developer to architect, because as a developer, you can kind of be a little more laissez-faire about notifications and other things that come from different parts of the company. As an architect, those are going to be much more important for you to react to, and react to in a timely manner. These are all things that Inbox Zero is really, really good at. And you can even get, if you really want to, a nerd merit badge for having an Inbox Zero if you really want one. So let's talk for a second about some personal information management philosophies out in the world. This is one of my kind of casual hobbies, is looking at personal management kind of techniques. And Covey Franklin Planner has a really interesting perspective on things that I think is quite nice for developers and architects. They have this quadrant where they say pretty much any task that you have to do can go into one of these quadrants. So we have unimportant and important on the left-hand side, and urgent and non-urgent along the top. So obviously the things that you're going to tackle first are the important, urgent things, because they're urgent and they're important. You need to deal with those right away. Unfortunately, a lot of what you end up dealing with, though, is in the quadrant 3, which are unimportant but urgent. So they're not important in the long-term scheme of things, but they're temporarily important right now. Someone wants the status on something, or something that seems like it's an important thing now, but is really unimportant in the long-term scheme of things. Obviously, unimportant and non-urgent things like watching TV can kind of take care of themselves. But the really critical one here, and this is why this Covey idea is a valuable perspective, are the non-urgent important things. Those are things on your projects like the architectural refactorings that need to happen, cleaning up technical debt, fixing the little compromises that were put in your code base earlier to accommodate schedule pressure or for whatever external reason that you've got technical debt. Those are those non-urgent, important things that you really need to deal with. And of course, the problem with most personal information managers is they do a very poor job of tracking non-urgent things that are also important. One of the perspectives that Covey has is this idea of organizing your time around the really important things and then letting the less urgent things fill in around it. So the metaphor that they use for this is, let's say that you have this jar and you have sand and rocks and other things, and you want to try to fill this jar, which is your time, most efficiently. Are you going to start by putting the smallest things in there first and then trying to put the big things in there? No, of course what you'll do is put the really big things, the really important things in there first, and then fill in around with these smaller, more urgent and less important but urgent kinds of things. That's this entire philosophy of Covey, is to try to help you identify those important but non-urgent things. So from an architecture standpoint, maybe you keep a separate list of the kind of technical debt backlog or the refactorings that we'd like to do, but you need to track that somewhere as an important thing that's not urgent right now, but we may need to escalate the importance of it because of something that's coming down the road that will have an impact, a dependency on this, or it's going to cause some later development that we're going to do to be much more difficult unless we resolve this issue now. Another thing that's very popular in the kind of personal information management world is the getting things done kind of philosophy/religion. But the idea behind getting things done is that ideas can happen anywhere and you need to be able to capture them in a really efficient way. The other kind of perspective from the getting things done world is that information without context is just a collection of facts, that if you have a piece of information, you really have to be within the correct context to operate on that information. And so context is this really, really important thing in getting things done, and I think that's a really valuable thing to take out of the kind of GTD philosophy of how to deal with things. But in the original world of getting things done, context was really just a location. So it was the enabler location for doing stuff. So there was a context for I'm in the office, there was a context where I can make phone calls now, there's a context where I can answer email. And for a long time I tracked that as part of the tasks that I would capture, but it turns out that for most knowledge workers, like architects, those enablers are everywhere. You always have access to your email. You can always make phone calls. It's not nearly as location specific. And so there's a nice new take on context, where there's a link from the Simplicity Bliss blog on this slide, where context is really captured as mental state, not physical location. And so I have context for things like full focus. That means tasks that I need to work on where I can devote like 2 hours of full focus time. So if I'm doing development on a project, or I'm doing some sort of refactoring, or I need to build a spike to understand how something works because it may or may not make it in the next architecture, those are the things I'm going to reserve that full focus time for, large uninterrupted chunks of time, versus something like short dashes. This is another context that I have. When I sit down at my desk, I have 10 minutes before the next meeting happens. Is there something useful I can get done in that 10 minutes? That's a useful context, because what it allows you to do is organize your world in a normal kind of hierarchical view around project management, but then slice through that with context and say, okay, given this moment, what's the best thing that I can work on right now? And so I think this is a better view of context, is the mental capability that you have right now to do something. So maybe you have a housekeeping context that's at the very end of the day when you're kind of brain dead and you need to do something, but something that doesn't take a lot of horsepower. And so you have context that really reflect your mental state and your capability of doing work. There are a bunch of different ways to do getting things done. Obviously, just a pencil and paper will do this. There are lots of little applications that do this as well. I'm a big believer of having a recorder with me all the time so I can capture little things if I want to. Most of the modern PIMs, particularly ones that run on like a variety of mobile devices plus operating systems like OmniFocus, which is the personal information manager I'm using now, will let you use, for example, Siri on the iPhone to capture OmniFocus tasks for you, so you don't even have to do a translation from a book or anything like that. You can put those things directly from Siri into your PIM, which is really nice because you can just say things and get them done. Things is a really popular personal information manager that does this context stuff. They have a little bit of a quirk in that they have this distinction between projects versus areas of interest, which are projects that never go away. I don't think this is a particularly useful distinction, but that distinction exists in this tool. I used to use Things for a long time. I've switched over to OmniFocus now, which is another personal information manager. It does a really excellent job of managing both projects and context as orthogonal concepts. And it also does really good synchronization across all the iOS devices and keeps everything in sync and all that stuff. This used to be a lot more problematic, but the tools have gotten much better at doing this now, and so you can really rely on the synchronization across devices, etc., for all these tools now. So let's talk about some tools. That was a couple of tools in the personal information manager space. Another couple of tools that you will find quite useful as an architect. One of those is some sort of magic bucket that you can gather information in and then get back to it really easily. There are lots of different pieces of software that do this. You could do this purely on the operating system, but it's nice having the ability to do searching and those sorts of capabilities. DevonThink is a really good example of one of these. So you can harvest things very easily off of websites and dump them in here and then go and sort them and look at them very easily. So for example, maybe you are, as an architect, realize that the current JavaScript MVC framework that you're using won't quite cut it long term, so you need to start doing research on other alternative Java MVC frameworks. You really need a way to organize all that information so you can get to it and categorize it much more easily. So a tool like DevonThink will allow you to do that. A really popular magic bucket tool that a lot of people use because the synchronization and everything is so good is Evernote, which runs on lots of platforms and has pretty good search capabilities, and you create multiple notebooks and things like that. This again is one of those magic bucket areas of a place that you can easily dump information into and then go and harvest it to organize it a bit later. I'm also a big fan of using mind maps as a way to store unstructured kind of information before they end up getting structured into something like a proper outliner. And so I'm a big user of mind maps when I'm doing things like keynotes and talks, when I'm organizing some stuff that I'm not quite sure about yet. The thing that's so nice about mind maps is they're not only hierarchical, but you can also get these links that bypass the hierarchy and connect things together. And very often those links are these kind of contextual things that give you some really nice insight that you might not have had before if things were strictly in a kind of a hierarchical view. There's another tool that's Mac only that's very, very complex but very, very interesting from an organizational standpoint called Tinderbox. It's a kind of an expensive tool and it's very special purpose, but it's kind of a mind mapping tool that morphs into an outliner. So I actually use an outliner and a mind mapping tool. I use a mind mapping for more unstructured things, and then when I need to structure them, I move them into an outliner. This tool, Tinderbox, lets you just basically switch back and forth between those two views. It's also really intelligent in that you can build items that have rules around them so that they execute rules every time you make a change on the mind map. So it's almost like a spreadsheet in that a particular node can have rules that affect other nodes, and as you make changes, they recalculate and can have effects on them. So for example, at one point I did a keynote where I wanted to talk about a bunch of different issues, and I know all of them needed to be covered, but I was restructuring things, and so this box on the left over there that says check for key thoughts basically is a little rule that runs that ensures that all of the thoughts that I want to put in the keynote is still in that keynote container, that I haven't accidentally removed one of them. You can actually build some really elaborate kind of rules and things in Tinderbox. This is probably beyond what you would ever need though, unless you're just really, really into this kind of tool. But I know several architects who actually use Tinderbox to manage the very, very complex things that they're working on. It takes a fair amount of time investment to get things out of Tinderbox, but once you put that time investment in, you get a corresponding benefit out of it. So to summarize, you need to organize for more than just yourself. Now you're going to have to organize for a larger group of people. You need to manage information flow both in and out. As a developer, mostly you have to manage information flow in for people that tell you to do stuff and expect things from you. As the architect, you're going to have to manage an information flow out, not only to underlings, but also to other stakeholders within the organization. This is one of the things that you have to get better at as an architect, is be able to articulate ideas to non-technical people very clearly, and so that's part of this information flow. Try to separate project from role priorities. So you're going to have project priorities, and they're probably going to be captured in some sort of issue tracker or requirements tool or something like that. But you also have role priorities that are separate from the project priorities. You may, in fact, be responsible for more than one project, and so that role spans multiple projects. Separate those things from one another. This is another tricky thing, because as a developer, you just have project responsibilities, but now you're going to take on more specific individual responsibilities in this new role. And try to make time for things that are important but not urgent. Try to identify those things and encourage other people to identify those things. You become the clearinghouse for all those important but not urgent things, and the architect should really prioritize those things, so when you do find that magical slack time of a couple of days on a project, you have a ready list of, okay, here are some things that we can do given the time frame that we have, some things that we can do to move the ball forward without getting too mired in the details of really long running refactorings and things like that.